what does it mean that we live in a secular society? And based on that answer in particular, what kind of posture can we, as people of faith this evening, take as we inhabit a secular age? Should we be manning our battle stations and rebuilding the religious fortresses to keep us in and them out? Or, on the flip side, does the reality of a secular society that we live in actually present the opportunity for a new impact that the religious ethic can make in the contemporary movement we find ourselves in today? Now, I would be remiss if I didn't point out just briefly that I think the whole idea of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all being under the banner of Abraham is largely a modern concept that is historically, with all due respect, a bit of a misnomer. The concept of the Abrahamic faith, as it has developed in interfaith relations in the modern era, can really only be traced back to the 1950s. But realistically, the term Abrahamic faiths to include Judaism, Christianity, and Islam is somewhat of an historical fallacy. But nonetheless, I think the point of tonight is, however, important. We should come together and discuss our different concepts, within the Abrahamic faith as a touchstone, as in dialogue. We should work together to discuss our commonalities, our place of agreement, and establish the common ground where we can. But while time doesn't allow me to elaborate on that particular point, I do believe it, with all due respect, to be a bit of a misnomer to talk about Abraham as a touchstone of unity, specifically, and theological continuity more broadly, as a focal point for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim thought. Now, we're addressing the question, what do we mean by secular? A secular society as we interact as people of faith. And there are many ways that the term secular operates. On normative level, the term refers to a person, place, or thing that we refer to as secular, in a way that refers to it being somehow neutral, unbiased, objective, and capital R rational. And specifically, a-religious or non-religious. Because of that, because of the way that secular has been used in our contemporary context, it has adopted a sense of a-religious neutrality. If that is the working definition of secular, then secularism is the doctrinal or dogmatic requirement that dictates that the public spheres have to be governed by rules that are, at least at face value, dictated by the previous descriptors that I used. Neutral, unbiased, objective, and above all, a-religious. This is the mindset that a secular society would dictate rule the public sphere, the institutions, the societal networks that we find ourselves in. So we have a definition of the secular. We have the ideology of secularism as a dogmatic stance. And then thirdly, we need to understand that there was a concept understood as the secularization thesis. The idea had a predictive theory that stated that since the Enlightenment period and Industrial Revolution, we should be expecting a society that is advancing in technology and scientific knowledge and capitalistic infrastructure and so on. That the society we see around us would be diminishingly religious and therefore secularized. Here's the problem with those framings of the secular. The first, that there is a neutral, unbiased, capital R rational standpoint, is a myth. And one of the most important elements in philosophy over the last century is the round debunking and refutation of the secular utopic idea. And it is not just religious voices who have championed the refutation, but across the board. Douglas Murray, in his latest book, The Madness of the Crowd, says, in the absence of the secularist ability to hammer out ethics on fundamental issues, we may be forced to recognize that returning to faith is the best option available. Even the infamous atheist Richard Dawkins has now come out and repudiated his previous belief that Christianity and religion more broadly should be banished from society even more firmly. In fact, he told the Times in a recent interview, ending religion, once his fervent goal, would be a terrible idea, because it would give people a license to do really bad things. Despite the fact that Dawkins has long argued that the very idea of the God of the Bible being necessary as a basis for morality is both ridiculous and offensive, he appears to be backtracking. People may feel free to do bad things because they feel God is no longer watching them, he said, citing the example of security cameras as a deterrent for shoplifters. One wonders if he himself has read Douglas Murray's recent work, reminding people that Soviets murdered their millions for the simple fact and belief that there was no judge waiting for them when the killing was over. And just to belabor my point even further, I quote agnostic historian Tom Holland, not Spider-Man, the historian, who says, in 2002 in Amsterdam, the World Humanist Congress affirmed the worth, dignity, and autonomy of the individual and the right of every human being to the greatest possible freedom compatible within the rights of others. Yet, this, despite humanists' stated ambition to provide an alternative to dogmatic religion, was itself a statement of belief. Himmler, at any rate, had understood that license was opened up by the abandonment of Christianity. The humanist assumption that atheism and liberalism go together is just that, an assumption. Without the biblical dogma that God created humanity in his own image to draw upon, the reverence of humanists for their own species can't help but seem mawkish and shallow. The second problem with the secular or secularistic idea in our current society is that it doesn't make sense of the complexity of the age we see around us. Secularism does not do justice to the features of the secular age we find ourselves. You see, we have an opportunity to listen carefully to our contemporary cultural moment. And when we do so, we will be surprised to hear persistent, enduring longings of transcendence and fullness that individuals within the atheistic community don't realize are so prevailing. My suggestion is that a secular lens of our contemporary age does not truly do justice to the particular longings, the cracks in the proverbial secular ceilings, hungers that still exist within a secular age. For us to truly understand a secular age, we need to ask the question, why does the society around us still seem haunted by the transcendent? Why? Because we need to ask ourselves, why should there be, such a thing as a rationally ordered, rationally comprehensible universe? And why should this 2 pounds of gray matter that takes up residence in my skull have any purchase on ultimate reality? If my brain, as a secular, natural, materialistic mindset would say, is purely the outcome of processes that favor merely reproduction and survival, why should that be? Why should my brain be able to access the mysteries of the cosmos and the depths of human rationality? Why should the world be like this? And why should my human mind actually be able to access logic? This is what James K.A. Smith calls the dynamics of disenchantment. In other words, to live in a secular society, a secular world, is to live in a world where the cosmos has been flattened. Our society has tried to hold on to transcendental values of meaning and purpose and reality. But outside of the framework of mystery and transcendence itself that gave a rational foundation for it, the European Enlightenment ended up divorcing the creator from the creation. However, this dynamic of disenchantment that we see as an end result of a natural materialistic framework that we see provides opportunities for us to communicate to our neighbors, to our family members, to our fellow students. When we communicate with people who operate on the dynamic of disenchantment and have a worldview that flattens out the transcendent and holds to a staleness of meaning, a worldview that gives answers to the ultimate questions of meaning, of morality, of hope, of value, of purpose, of love, these will be inexcusably attractive. Why? because the false neutrality of secularism assumes its fallback is atheism, or the lack of a transcendent creator. And not in a superficial way, because you're not getting the answer to those questions from a natural materialistic framework. John Gray, the atheist philosopher from the London School of Economics, says modern secular humanism is the faith that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, this is impossible. The human mind sees evolutionary success, not truth. To think otherwise is to resurrect the pre-Darwinian error that humans are different from all other animals. And if you want to highlight a progressive society, i.e. a society that is progressing, I would argue you cannot look at atheism. Atheism statistically is almost exclusively Western. It is predominantly white, nearly entirely male, and chiefly upper middle class. If we want to talk about a worldview that is progressing, I think we should look no further than Christianity. How it has transcended cultures, first starting as a Middle Eastern faith, very quickly becoming the religion of Africa and Asia Minor. It then took over Europe and the West, and now per capita is becoming the predominant religion of Asia and Africa. In a secular atheistic society which has divorced true meaning and purpose from significant living, there is an answer to these questions. When I talk about the dynamic of disenchantment, I ask the question, why should my human mind actually be able to access logic? Well, in the beginning of John's biography of Jesus' life, what we call the Gospel according to John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and he came into the world, Jesus. And in consistency with himself, he gave himself up for us. Here is a logos, a logic that we can truly trust. The Christian worldview and the good news of it lived out in a purposeful, scripturally grounded, Jesus-centered, and God-filled way will be the answer to a society haunted by the transcendent. You see, through the life of the believer, the person lost in mundane secularism is the reality that the universe is charged with the grandeur of God's glory. This is what James K.A. Smith once again calls punching skylights in our brass heavens. I want to end with this. It's a painting by the 17th century painter, El Greco. And it portrays the opening of the fifth seal in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. In it, John looks heavenward, arms raised at the epiphany of the Lamb on the throne. Yet when you look at that, you don't get that. Why? Because in the late 1800s, in the name of improving the work, 175 centimeters, 5 feet, was cut from the top of the canvas. And in the name of restoration and improvement, what ends up is almost a parable of the secular age. The exultant arms of John the Revelator reach towards nothing. The martyrs who stand by John at the base of the heavenly throne receive gifts from no one. John, praising the non-existent, detached, raising their arms to nothing, looking for something that is no longer there. Secularism plants its feet firmly in midair, rising its hands to nothing, with no ability to ground objective truths, and therefore the modern secular dogma that seeks human flourishing has actually cut us off from that which truly completes the picture. Thank you.